Hi there, my friends. We are looking today at the Banter. Now, when I saw that Ben Peterson had made his own knife design, I had to give it a try. It's not every day that you can get a knife designed by a successful recording artist. No, but in all seriousness, I did ask Ben for a review sample of this knife. That is very unlike me, but there's a bit to this story that I like, because Ben's sort of like I would say he's probably more successful me type person, you know, a person who talks about knives online. He actually managed to do it for a job for a while, which is nice. And so seeing someone get it together and actually have a design that transitions into a piece of functioning kit is quite rare. I can't even put pen to paper and get a coherent knife design out. Every time. So here comes Ben using his industry knowledge, connection, and I guess experience handling many more knives than I've ever handled, and he has produced something truly accessible. So we'll start by talking about the generals, the size comparisons, and the specs of the blade, and then we're going to talk about how I feel about it. So the overall length is 6.5 inches, 165 millimeters. The blade length, 2.875 inches, 73 millimeters. The blade is an inch tall, that's 25 millimeters. The blade thickness, 0.1 inches, 2.5 millimeters. Blade material is CPM S35 VN at a unknown Rockwell. I'm going to assume 58 to 59. The handle length is 3.6 inches long, 91 millimeters. The handle width, tallness, is 1.1 inches, 28 millimeters. Handle thickness is 0.45 inches, that's 6 millimeters. Handle's made of G10. It comes in either blue or black. And the blade also comes in either a grey stonewash or a black coated. Frame and liner lock is stainless steel. The knife uses a liner lock, which is a piece of steel reaching across from the interior of the scale to the tang of the open blade, which then needs to be pushed across to close. The weight is 2.61 ounces. That's 73 grams. That's 1.5 packets of Neon Nerds. It is, of course, made by the We Knife Company in China. The steel hardware requires number 8 Torx on the frame screws and number 6 on the pivot screw. This is the knife next to the Ontario Rat number 2. Against the Opinel number 8. Against the Spyderco Para 3 Rex 45 edition on loan. Send me an email, old mate, I'll get it back to you. The Buck 110 Folden Hunter. The Victorinox Explorer. The Dozier Folding Hunter, made by K-Bar. So going into the different parts of the blade, we're going to talk blade, we're going to talk handle, we're going to talk overall appearance, we're going to talk function. Starting with the blade, S35 VN steel is what we have got from this one. It's a high saber grind, so the whole blade surface is about an inch tall, and then about sort of 4/5 of the way up is when the terminating edge bevel sort of starts. So you've got the stock thickness shoulder here, and then the flat grind goes from there all the way down to the terminating edge. That makes for a good slicing potential. It's having already a thin blade and then having it sort of nicely graduate over a longer period of time to a thin edge means it cuts quite good, and then still having the shoulder here means it does sort of eventually give the material that last little push when you are indeed separating things with your knife, which is a really nerdy way of saying cutting stuff. So geometry-wise, really happy with it. The factory edge cut well enough. Of course, I went and put my 17-degree mirror polished edge on it for some knife testing I'll show you later. But I've used this knife in both configurations extensively, and it does really well. I've carried this as my main EDC since I got it a couple of weeks ago, and overall I'm really happy with how the blade performs. The steel, We Knife Co's S35 VN has always been just relatively stable, relatively standard. This cut after my test where I take twisted sisal rope, cut using the same part of the blade until it no longer slices a piece of paper, tests that I've been doing for a long time. It cut 350 times, which is about the same as what the Mass Drop Keen cut with the same edge, which makes sense because that is also a Wii knife in S35 VN. So there we go. The steel is certainly adequate, good steel. S35 VN seems to be the industry's go-to at the moment. If you think about maybe 15 years ago, it was AUS 8, and maybe 10 years ago it was VG10. Now it seems to be S35 VN, which is a bit of a win for everyone. So if that's your baseline, then you're doing pretty well. So yep, good steel from Wii, well done. Nothing that's going to be particularly remarkable. It's going to be good edge holding. I found when sharpening it formed a burr really generously, really easily, which means you can measure your progress as you sharpen very well. And then the good thing about S35 is that generally just with a pretty rudimentary strop, you can get most sort of general dullness back to really sharp with just a few passes. So that's really cool as well. So happy enough with the blade. And again, considering the price, $110 for a knife made by the Wii Knife Company, which is generally one of the more well-regarded of the Chinese knife companies, unless you're on the total anti-China thing at the moment, which I know some of you are. Do what you got to do. But for a Wii knife, it's relatively the price balance, quality scale. When you look at the materials, generally rings true for me. The blade shape, very much a classic drop, or would you say spear point? I always thought when you could basically draw a straight line down the middle here, and each side was, the shape on each side was parallel of that straight line, that was a spear point, but it's been described as a drop point, which I guess it also is. Point. The spine drops down to the point from about this point. Looking at it against the Dozier Folding Hunter, very much a classic blade shape. Bob Dozier's hunting knives and stuff have used this blade shape for a long time. So the inspiration is obvious. It's there. So some relative similarities looking between these two initially, but remembering this is also a lock back and an FRN handle, and quite a different handle shape as well. But yes, the inspirations are worn on the sleeve of this knife. Ben would not deny that he's taken a lot of pages from a lot of different knife books. I'd say the CRKT Squid, the Dozier blade shape is definitely what's going on there. Moving to the handle. So the handle is a very small sort of squarish feature. If you look at it here, it's got two very definite sort of terminating ends there. Really reminds me of the Ontario SK5 survival knife, which isn't probably what Ben was going for at all, but I've always really enjoyed that shape. I like the squared off ends. It sort of makes it for a very neat looking knife. The blade, or the knife handle, fits my hand fairly well. It just about encapsulates the whole thing. There's a bit of tallness to it, which is good. There isn't really any voids or empty spots when I bear down and grip the knife, which is cool. It's what I'm after. So doing my cut test, I found it completely adequate in terms of grip. And that's a more extreme or a more sort of prolonged way of using a knife, when I think this is an EDC blade is mainly designed just to be taken out, used quickly here and there, and then put back in your pocket. It isn't a survival or a bushcraft knife made for doing long-term carving tasks. So overall, I really like the handle. The clip works really well as a pocket clip. I find in my particular hand it gives me a slight hot spot, but that's hands. They're a bit like feet, aren't they? Everything's going to fit a bit differently depending on how everything is laid out. What you were given when you were in line at the hand store. So the clip for me, there's a slight hot spot when I really bear down on it, and I just found when I was doing my cut test, there's a little bit of a notch here on my palm here, which was just not sitting completely plumb on it. But again, for your sporadic use, it's not an issue at all. It's just when you're doing something a bit more long term is when I noticed it. But certainly going to point it out because it's you might have the same hand as me and you might have the same issue. But I don't think there's a way of doing pocket clips in this style ideally. That's why I always prefer the Spyderco wire clip, because it's so rounded and it even has a little bit of give in it. I find it very rarely gives me any hot spots. So that's that. That's for me. Looking at the knife. What a accessible looking little knife. And this is something that is probably going to be a little polarizing, I think, in the knife community. The knife community isn't like the phone community or the tech community or anything. We don't necessarily love, it's not necessarily universal that people love simplicity. People like things to look a bit dangerous sometimes. And this certainly does not. This would actually look very much at home in a Duplo set or something like that. It barely looks sharp. It almost looks like a toy knife, is what I think my wife said when I took it out. It cuts and performs like a proper knife, don't worry. But looks-wise, it's so darn acceptable that it could really, if it wasn't made by Ben with a bit more savvy, this could almost fit in well on a Kickstarter campaign.
What makes a man? Is it a love for cigars, Kangol hats, beard care products, and framed alcohol advertisements for his man cave? Well, yes. But to complete your journey being the male equivalent to a bespoke-looking but mass-produced live, laugh, love proclamation, you also need a knife. We have handpicked the perfect ingredients for a knife to take on all of your life's greatest adventures, big or small. Designed in the USA and made by hand-selected artisans to the far, far, far west of America. We have a revolutionary new knife that you can hand down to your eventual son to steep in your own legend. The legend of the man who bought lots of knives from the internet. Sign up on Kickstarter now for a very earnest thank you message from the maker, the Banter, launching in fall 20.
But yes, luckily for us, it is made by someone who actually loves knives, and I think the design choice is good for probably getting into the hands of people who might not have chosen it otherwise if you didn't go completely extreme on one end of the taste scale. Because otherwise it would just be another niche-y Wii knife. And I think this is probably one of the more different Wii knives. In fact, it reminds me a bit more of a Civivi knife, just given the G10 material and the general sort of thumb stud liner locking nature of it. I always associate Wii myself with those sort of anodized titanium frame locks, although maybe I'm stuck in 2016 with my perceptions of the brand as well. But anyway, kind of different for a Wii knife. I love how the price is a little bit lower as well. 110 US for this feels right to me. It's certainly not cheap. If you want cheap and you want the basic elements of a decent blade with a lesser steel and a lesser handle material, hey, the Dozier will do you for like $25. No worries. AUS 8 FRN. Also a very uncomfortable pocket clip though for me. This part sits right in my hands, but we're not reviewing the Dozier. We're just saying what works and what doesn't work on that too. So there we are. Definitely a little knife. Definitely something that's more for the odd jobs rather than using all day, every day in a long term, working on the oil rig type scenario, but I really love it. It's found its place in my collection, I think, but then I also love kind of the story behind it as well. So this has the intangibles going for it to me too. And in fact, this whole knife review, just remembering that I didn't pay for this knife. And when I pay for a knife, it does affect me. I judge it much harsher. It's just how it goes, because I am not a tight ass, but I certainly count the dollars. When I've spent the dollars, that's what everyone does, doesn't it? But as a knife, if you just put this in my hand and not told me where it's from, I'd probably be thinking about the same thing. I'd probably be saying, oh, this is a really nice little usable, portable, very accessible looking EDC blade in a good steel that cuts really well. And I guess those are the main elements I'm after anyway. But just do be mindful that this knife was a gift from Ben. It came with all the stickers and the poster and all that good stuff, like the influencer package. So there we are. So whether that affects this review or not, hey, maybe do your due diligence and watch a few other reviews too. At this stage, you're probably only going to get reviews from people like me though, who got knives from Ben. So good luck with that. But I think generally, if I was to have just taken this knife without knowing its origins, its product, story, anything like that, I'd still really like it. There's nothing here that's controversial to me at all. It's just whether or not you're happy for your knife to kind of look this harmless and this diminutive in size as well, I guess. So there we are. My thoughts on the Wii knife Banter. Love to see what Ben does next. I don't think you need a Banter 2, like a bigger version of it, but I think Ben's got the chops to probably design something completely different and have that as his second knife. So anyway, you check out Ben's nafs.com website for more information about what he's doing, what he's up to, how he's moving and shaking, and I'll see you guys all in the next film. Goodbye now. Okay.
Guys, rock that bass.